Chapter 12. Harry Carried Off. Early in September, Stanley was sent to purchase cattle from some of the villages near the foot of the hills, and at the same time to make inquiries as to the movements of a large band of marauders who had been making raids in the neighbourhood. He had with him 4 troopers of the bodyguard. Harry Brooke accompanied him, although from the healthier situation of Prome the amount of illness during the wet season did not approach that which had been suffered at Rangoon. A great many men were in hospital, and there were many deaths. Harry had had a sharp attack of fever, and as he had now recovered to a certain extent, the medical officer of his regiment strongly recommended that he should have a change; and he, therefore, without difficulty, obtained his colonel's leave to accompany Stanley, as the ground would be much higher than that on the river, and the mere fact of getting away from a camp where so many deaths took place every day would, in itself, be of great value. Stanley's daily journeys were not likely to be long ones, as he had instructions to stop at all villages, and to see how things were going on, and whether the people had any complaints to make of oppression and exaction by their local authorities. "It's a tremendous pull, your being able to speak the language, Stanley," Harry said. "If it hadn't been for that, you would have been stuck at Prome like the rest of us. Instead of that, you are always about, and you look as fresh and healthy as if you were at a hill station in India." "Yes, it has been an immense advantage to me in all ways. Of course, I should never have gotten my staff appointment if it had not been for that. Oh, by the way, I have not told you that while you were down with the fever, the Gazette containing the confirmation of my appointment by the General, and the notice of my commission, dated on the day of my appointment, came out. I had quite a lump sum to draw for, altogether. I had been paid as interpreter all along. The paymaster made a difficulty about my pay as a subaltern until I was gazetted regularly. So I have quite a large sum coming to me on my pay and allowances. I don't know how you stand for cash, but if you are short at all, I can let you have anything you want." "Oh, I have got really more than I know what to do with, Stanley. I bought an uncommonly good native horse, as you know, 6 weeks ago, and I am going to ride him for the first time now, but really that's almost the first penny that I have spent since we left Rangoon. There is nothing to buy here except food, and of course that is a mess business. I had an idea that this was a rich country, but so far one has seen nothing in the way of rich dress materials, or shawls, or carpets, or jewellery that one could send home as presents. Why, in India I was always being tempted, but here it is certainly the useful rather than the ornamental that meets the eye. I saw some nice things at Ava, but of course all the upper class has bolted as we came up the country, and the traders in rich goods did the same. Are you going to take a servant with you, Harry? I don't think that there is any occasion to do so, for Meinik can look after us both well enough." "Yes, I am thinking of taking my native, the man I hired just after I got here. He is a very good fellow, and made himself very useful while I was ill. I picked up a tat for him yesterday for a few rupees. I know that your man would do very well for us both, but sometimes, when you make a village your headquarters and ride to visit others from it, I may not feel well enough to go with you, and then he would come in very handy, for he has picked up a good many English words. Your man is getting on very well that way." "Yes, he was some time before he began, for of course he had no occasion for it, but now that he has taken to what he considers an English costume, and has made up his mind that he will never settle down again under a Burmese government, he has been trying hard to pick up the language. I found that it was rather a nuisance at first when, instead of telling him what was wanted in his own language, I had to tell him in English, and then translate it for him. However, he does understand a good deal now, and whenever he has nothing else to do, he is talking with the soldiers. Of course, from his riding about so much with me, he is pretty well known now, and as he is a good-tempered, merry fellow, he makes himself at home with them, and if the campaign lasts another 6 months, I think he will speak very fair English." "I fancy that you will have to make up your mind when he is a permanency, Stanley. I am sure he intends to follow you wherever you go, whether it is to England, India, or anywhere else." "Oh, I shan't be sorry for that, Harry. Certainly not as long as I am out here. In the first place, he is a really very handy fellow, and ready to make himself useful in any way. Then there is no doubt that he is greatly attached to me, and would go through fire and water for me. A man of that sort is invaluable to anyone knocking about as I shall be, when the war is over and I take up trading again. His only fault is that he is really too anxious to do things for me. Of course, when I am on duty there is nothing much he can do, but if I am sitting in a room, he will squat for hours in the corner and watch me. If my cheroot gets low, there he is with a Freshman and a light, in a moment. If I drop my handkerchief or a pen, there he is with it, before I have time to stoop. Sometimes I have really to invent errands to send him on, so as to give him something to do for me. I own that I have not contemplated what position he would occupy if I go trading, but I quite recognize that he will go with me, and that he would become a portion of my establishment, even if that establishment consisted only of himself. Will you be ready to start at 4 in the morning? The sun is tremendously hot now, on the days between the rain. At any rate, it will be much better for you, till you get your strength, to travel in the cool of the morning or in the evening." "Yes, I shall be ready. I will be round here with my servant by that hour. By the way, what shall I bring with me?" "Nothing at all. I shall take a couple of chickens, and some bread and coffee and sugar, and a bottle of brandy for emergencies. But we shall have no difficulty in getting food in the villages. The troopers will only carry their day's rations with them. After that, I always act as mess caterer, and charge expenses when I get back here." Accordingly, the next morning they started at 4 o'clock. Stanley insisted that Harry should ride his second horse for the present, as his own, having been 6 weeks without exercise, and fed very much better than it had been accustomed to, was in much too high spirits to be pleasant for an invalid. Meinik therefore took Harry's, and the latter rode beside his cousin, whose horse had had abundant exercise, and was well content to canter quietly along by the side of his companion. By the end of 10 days, Harry had picked up some of his strength. They now reached a village which Stanley decided to use as his headquarters for a few days, while he made excursions to other places within a day's ride. It was a good place for a halt, standing as it did at some height on the hills, where the air was much cooler at night than in the flat country. It was surrounded by a clearing of about 100 acres in extent, planted with cocoa trees, pepper, and many kinds of vegetables. "This is delightful," Harry said, as they sat in front of the hut that had been cleared for them, and looked out over the plain. "It must be 20 degrees cooler here than it was at Prome. I think I shall do nothing tomorrow, Stanley, but just sit here and enjoy myself. I know it's very lazy, for I am feeling quite myself again. Still, after 10 days' riding, I do think that it will be pleasant to have a day's rest." "Do, by all means," Stanley said. "I think you had better stay here for the 3 days that we shall remain. Your man's a very good cook, and there is no lack of food. Those chickens we had just now were excellent, and the people have promised to bring in some game tomorrow. There are plenty of snakes, too, and you lose a good deal, I can assure you, by turning up your nose at them. They are just as good as eels, as Meinik cooks them, stewed with a blade of cinnamon and some hot peppers. I cannot see that they can be a bit more objectionable to eat than eels. Indeed, for anyone knows, the eel may have been feasting on a drowned man the day before he was caught, while the snakes only take a meal once a week or so, and then only a small bird of some kind. Yes, I dare say that you are quite right, Stanley, and I own that the dishes your man turns out look tempting, but I just cannot bring myself to try, at any rate as long as I can get anything else to eat. If I knew that it was a case of snake or nothing, I would try it, but till then I prefer sticking to birds and beasts." The next morning Stanley rode off with 2 of his escort and Meinik, who declined altogether to be left behind. "No, master," he said, "there is never any saying when you may want me, and what should I ever say to myself if misfortune were to come to you, and I were not to be there?" Stanley had a long day's work. As a rule, villagers had few complaints to make, but at the place he went to on this occasion, the headman had been behaving as in the old times, and Stanley had to listen to a long series of complaints on behalf of the villagers. The case was fully proved, both as to extortion and ill treatment. Stanley at once deprived the man of his office, and called upon the villagers to assemble and elect another in his place. "If you are not satisfied," he said to the fellow, "you can go to Prome and appeal to the general there, but I warn you that if you do, you must give notice to the villagers of your intention, so that they may, if they choose, send 2 or 3 of their number to repeat the evidence that they have given me. I have noted this fully down, and I can tell you that the general, when he reads it, will be much more likely to order you a sound flogging than to reinstate you in your office." It was dusk when Stanley arrived within 2 miles of the village where he had left Harry. Meinik, who was riding just behind him, brought his horse up alongside. "Do you see that, sir? There is a light in the sky. It is just over where the village is. I am afraid there is a fire there." "You are right, Meinik. I hope nothing has gone wrong." He touched his horse with his heel, and rode on at a gallop. He became more and more anxious as he approached the village. No flames could be seen leaping up, but there was a dull glow in the sky. As he rode into the clearing, he reined up his horse in dismay. A number of glowing embers alone marked the place where the village had stood, and no figures were to be seen moving about. "There has been foul play, Meinik. Get ready for action, men," he said to the 2 troopers, and they dashed forward at a gallop. 2 or 3 little groups of people were sitting in an attitude of deep dejection by the remains of their houses. "What has happened?" Stanley shouted, as he rode up. "The robbers have been here, and have slain many and burned the village." "Where is my friend?" "They have carried him off, my lord, or at least we cannot find his body. His servant and one of the soldiers are lying dead, but of the other soldier and the officer there are no signs." "This is terrible!" Stanley exclaimed. "Tell me exactly how it happened." "It was 4 hours ago, my lord. The robbers came suddenly out from the plantation, and fell upon the people. Many they killed at once, but many also have escaped, as we did, by running in among the plantations, and so into the forest. We heard the firing of guns for a little time, then everything was silent, and we know that the robbers were searching the houses. Half an hour later, smoke rose in many places, and then flames, and then after a time all was quiet. A boy crept up among the bushes, and came back with the news that they had all gone. Then we came out again. 23 of our people had been killed, and 8 carried off. At least, we cannot find the bodies. The white officer and one of his soldiers have all gone also." "Which way did they go?" "The tracks show that they went up the hill. Most likely they will have gone to Toungoo, if they have gone to any town at all; but indeed, we think they have taken the prisoners to get a reward for them." Stanley had thrown himself off his horse as he rode up, and he stood for some time silently leaning against it. Then he said to Meinik: "Picket the horses, and then come and have a talk with me." Then he turned to the 2 troopers. "There is nothing to be done now. You had better look about, and see what you can find in the way of food, and then get a grave dug for your comrade, and another for Mr. Brooke's servant." The 2 Mohammedan troops saluted, and led their horses away. Meinik, after picketing the animals, returned to Stanley, but seeing that the latter was pacing up and down, and evidently not disposed to speak, he went away. There were a good many fowls walking about, in a bewildered way, near the huts. They had been away, as usual, searching for food in the plantations and fields when the robber band arrived, and on their return home at dusk had found everything changed. A boy at once caught and killed 2 of these, plucked them, and brought them to Meinik, who, getting some embers from the fires, cut the fowls in 2 and put them on to roast. A few minutes sufficed to cook them. As soon as they were ready, Meinik took them to Stanley. "You must eat, master," he said. "You have had nothing since we started this morning, and sorrow alone makes a poor supper. You will want to do something, I know, and will need all your strength." "You are right, Meinik. Yes, give me one of them, and take the other one yourself, and while we eat we can talk. Of course, I must make an effort to rescue my cousin from the hands of this band." "Yes, master, I know that you would do that." "Did you ask how many there were of them, Meinik?" "Some say 40, some say 60. If we knew where they are now, and could come up to them, we might manage to get them off while the robbers were asleep." Meinik shook his head. "They are sure to keep a strict guard over a white officer, but if we rushed in and shouted and fired pistols, they might all run away." "I am afraid not, Meinik. They might be scared for a minute, but directly they saw that there were only 2 of us, they would turn and kill us. Your people are brave enough. They may feel that they cannot stand against our troops, owing to our discipline, but they fight bravely hand to hand. However, we don't know exactly which way they have gone, and it would be hopeless to search for them in the forest during the darkness." "What should they go to Toungoo for?" "I have been thinking it over, master, and it seems to me that many of them may belong there, or to the villages near. They may not dare return to their homes, because they are afraid that they would be punished for having left the army, and would certainly be sent off again to it. Now they may think that, if they go back with a white officer and soldier, and tell some story of having beaten a great many English, they will be rewarded, and may even be able to remain some time in their homes before they are sent off. Or they may be ordered to march with their prisoners to Ava, where they would get still more reward. I can see no other reason for their carrying off the officer." "I think very likely that is so, Meinik. Anyway, we are more likely to rescue my cousin at Toungoo than we should be while on the road. It would be next to impossible to find them among all the hills and trees, and even if we did come upon them at night, and could creep into the midst of them, we might find that my cousin is too severely wounded to travel, for as there was a fight, it is almost certain he must have been wounded before he was captured. Therefore, I think it best to make straight for Toungoo. How many miles is it from here, do you think?" Meinik went over to the natives and asked the question. "About 45 miles, they say. Very bad travelling, all mountains, but 10 miles to the north is a road that runs straight there." "Then we had better follow that, Meinik. In this broken country and forest, we should be losing our way continually." "How will you go, master? On horse or foot?" "We will go on horseback, as far as we can. We are not likely to meet people travelling along the road, at present. Another thing is that, if we can get the horses as near the town as possible, they would be very useful, for if Mr. Brooke has been wounded badly, he may not be able to walk far. You do not know whether the country near the town is open, or whether the forests approach it closely?" The natives were again applied to. "It is a rich country there, they say, and well cultivated, for 5 or 6 miles round the town." "I will go and have a talk with them, presently. It will, of course, be necessary for me to disguise myself again." Meinik nodded. "Yes, you must do that, master. Do you think we can get 2 or 3 men to go with us from here?" "If you will pay them, master, no doubt they will be ready to go. They are well content with the white rulers. they find that they are not oppressed, and everything is paid for, and that the white officers treat them kindly and well. They have lost many things in this affair today, and would be glad to earn a little money." "How many would you like to have?" "4 or 5, Meinik. I don't exactly know, at present, what there would be for them to do, but they could help to make fires and keep watch, while we are doing something. At any rate, they may be useful. Of course, I shall get the trooper out, too, if I can. Very likely they will be confined together, and if we rescue one, then of course we can rescue the other. Now I must do some writing. Get me a torch of some sort, and I will do it while you are speaking to the natives." Stanley always carried a notebook and a pen and ink, to take down statements and complaints as he rode about. He now sat down and wrote an account of what had taken place during his absence. "We had no previous news of the existence of the band," he went on, "and the natives themselves had certainly no fear of any attack being imminent. Had I thought that there was the slightest risk, I should not have made the village my headquarters, or have left Mr. Brooke there, with only his servant and 2 troopers. I regret the matter most deeply, and am about to set off to Toungoo with my man. I shall, of course, go in disguise, and shall make every endeavour to free my cousin. I trust, General, that you will grant me leave for this purpose. I am, of course, unable to say how long it may take me, but however long, I shall persevere until I learn that my cousin is dead, or until I am, myself, killed. I trust that in starting at once, on the assumption that you will grant me leave, I am not committing a breach of duty. But if so, and you feel that you cannot, under the circumstances in which you are placed, grant leave to an officer to be absent on private business, I enclose a formal resignation of my commission, stating why I feel myself constrained, even in the presence of the enemy, to endeavour to rescue my cousin from the band that has carried him off. At any rate, it could not be said that I resigned in order to shirk danger. I sent off 2 days ago, by one of the natives here, a report of my proceedings up to date, and have now the honour to enclose the notes I took of my investigations today into the conduct of the headman at Pilbara, and my reasons for depriving him of his office. I shall leave the 2 troopers of my escort here, with orders to remain until either I return, or they receive instructions from Prome. I am taking a few of the villagers with me. Should anything occur to me at Toungoo, they will bring back the news to the troops, and I shall leave instructions with them to carry it at once to you. If I find that Mr. Brooke has been sent on to Ava, I shall, of course, follow and endeavour to effect his rescue on the road. As it is possible, General, that I may not have another opportunity of thanking you for the many kindnesses that you have shown me, allow me to do so, most heartily, now." When Stanley had concluded the letter, and written the paper offering his resignation, and giving his reasons for so doing, he called Meinik to him. "Well, Meinik, have you found men willing to go with us?" "Yes, master. I have got 5 men, 2 of them know Toungoo well. All are stout fellows. I offered them the terms that you mentioned, 50 ounces of silver to each man, if you succeeded by their aid in rescuing the officer. They were delighted at the offer, which would enable them to replace everything that they have lost. I told them, of course, that if it were necessary to fight, they would have to do so, and that as many of their countrymen were enlisted, as gun lascars and in other occupations, with the English, and are, of course, exposed to the attacks of their countrymen, they would only be doing what others have been willing to do. They said that they were ready enough to fight. You were the government now, and you were a good government, and they would fight for you, and besides, as the officer was carried off from their village, it was their duty to help to get him back. One of them said, 'These men who attacked us are Burmese soldiers. As they attack us, there is no reason why we should not attack them.' So I think, master, that you can count upon them. The Burmese have always been fond of fighting, because fighting means booty. The troops don't want to fight any more, because they get no booty, and a number of them are killed. But now that the villagers have been forced to go to the war against their will, and have been plundered, and many killed, by Burmese soldiers, they are quite ready to take sides with you. 3 of them have had wives or children killed, today, and that makes them full of fight." "Well, you had better tell them to cook, at once, food for 2 or 3 days. At 4 o'clock they are to start, through the forest, to the road you spoke of. We will set out at the same time on horseback, but we shall have to make a detour, so they will be on the road before we are. Tell them, when they get there, to stop until we come up." "Yes, master. It's a good thing that I rode your second horse yesterday, instead of Mr. Brooke's animal." "Yes, he is worth a good deal more than the other, Meinik, and I should certainly have been sorry to lose him. One of the men who is going with us says that he knows of the ruins of an old temple, 8 or 9 miles this side of Toungoo, and that this would be a good place for us to leave our horses. It's very, very old, one of those built by the people who lived in the land before we came to it, and the Burmans do not like to go near it. so that there would be no fear of our being disturbed there. Even these men do not much like going there, but I told them that no evil spirits would come where white men are." "It's rather far off, Meinik, but as you say, the country is cultivated. For some distance round the town we shall certainly have to leave our horses some 6 or 7 miles away, and 2 or 3 miles will not make much difference. We can put on our disguises there. You had better take a couple of boys to look after the horses, while we are away." "They would not sleep there at night," Meinik said, doubtfully. "I don't think the men would either, if you were not there." "That would not matter, Meinik, if, as you say, there is no fear of anyone else going there." "Certainly no one else will go there at night, master." "At any rate, if you can get 2 boys to go, we may as well take them. They might go there in the day, and feed and water the horses, and sleep some distance away at night." Meinik found 2 boys, 16 years old, who said that they would go with them, and at the hour agreed, Stanley and Meinik started on horseback. They descended the hill to the plain at its foot, and turned to the right, rode for some 10 or 12 miles, then they struck into the road, and following this at an easy pace, they came, in the course of another hour, upon the party of villagers sitting by the roadside. The sun was just setting, and they travelled for 3 hours without meeting anyone. Then they drew off into the wood, at a point where a small stream crossed the road, and after eating a meal and giving a good feed to the horses, lay down to sleep till the heat of the day abated. The natives, who were all armed with spears and swords, keeping watch by turns. At 4 o'clock that afternoon they started again, and at 10 approached the spot where, in the depth of the wood, lay the temple. The man who knew its position declared, however, that he could not find it at night. Stanley had no doubt that he was really afraid to go there, but as he did not wish to press them against their will, he said carelessly that it made no difference if they halted there or close by the road, and a fire being speedily lit, they bivouacked round it. Meinik had procured the necessary dyes from a village, and Stanley was again stained and covered with tattoo marks, as before. "What am I to do about your hair, master?" he asked. "It will never do for you to go like this." Stanley had not thought of this point, and for a time was completely at a loss. His own hair was now short, and could not possibly be turned up. "The only thing that I can see," Stanley said, after a long pause, "is for you and the men each to cut off a lock of hair from the top of your heads, where it will not show. The 6 locks would be ample, but I don't see how you are to fasten it below the turban." "Oh, there are berries we can get wax from," Meinik said. "We boil them in water, and the wax floats at the top. With that, master, we could fasten the hair in among yours, so that it would look all right." The men had all laughed at the proposal, but willingly consented to part with a portion of their hair. Meinik therefore proceeded to stain Stanley's close crop black, and the first thing in the morning the boys went out, soon returning with a quantity of berries. Some water was poured over them in an earthenware pot, and placed over the fire, and in half an hour a thick scum of oil gathered on the surface. Meinik skimmed it off as fast as it formed, and as it cooled it solidified into a tenacious mass, somewhat resembling cobbler's wax. The 6 locks of hair had already been cut off, and the ends were smeared with the wax and worked in among Stanley's own hair. Then a little of the hot wax was rubbed in, and the men all declared that no one would notice anything peculiar in his appearance. The long tresses were curled round at the top of the head, and a ring of muslin tied round. The Burmans were immensely amused at the transformation that had wrought in Stanley's appearance, and followed him through the wood to the temple without any signs of nervousness. The ruins were extensive. A considerable portion of the building had been hewed out of the face of a precipitous rock, in the manner of some Hindu temples, and it was evident that it had been the work of a people more closely allied to the Indian race than to the Tartar or Chinese people, from whom the Burmese sprung. Uncouth figures were sculpted on the wall. All these the Burmese looked with some awe, but as Stanley laughed and joked over them, they soon recovered their usual demeanour. "I am a great deal more afraid of tigers than of ghosts," Stanley said. "A deserted place like this is just the sort of spot that the tigers would be likely to be in. At any rate, if these caves do not go any further into the hill, and there are no signs of their doing so, it may be hoped that the tigers have their superstitions about it, too. At any rate, it will be a good thing to pile a great quantity of firewood at the entrance, and I think one of you had better stay here with the boys. They and the horses would be a great deal safer here, with a fire burning, than they would be in the woods, where a tiger might pounce upon them at any moment. As to this folly about spirits, it's only old women's chatter." The Burmese talked among themselves, and one of the men finally agreed to stay with the boys. An hour was spent in gathering a pile of brushwood and logs, and the man said that he and the two boys would gather plenty more during the day. They were, at 4 o'clock, to take the horses down to the river, a mile distant, and let them drink their fill. They had brought with them a large bag of grain, which had been carried by the men, a quantity of plantains, and some fowls. Therefore, the party that were to remain would be well provided. Moreover, in collecting the wood, a score of snakes had been killed. Some of these and a chicken had been cooking while they were at work, and as soon as this was eaten, they started for the town. When they came within a mile of it, Stanley entered a plantation of fruit trees, and Meinik and the 4 men went on. They returned in 2 hours with the news that a party of 10 men had arrived in the town on the previous day, with 2 prisoners. One, a coloured man, had been able to walk; the other, a white man, had been carried in on a litter. They had both been lodged in the jail. By this time, the conduct of the English towards the natives at Rangoon and the territory they occupied had had one good effect. Signally, as they had been defeated by them, the Burmese had lost their individual hatred of the strangers. They knew that their wounded and prisoners always received kind treatment at their hands, and although the court of Ava remained as arrogant and bigoted as ever, the people in Lower Burma had learned to respect their invaders, and the few prisoners they had taken received much better treatment than those who had been captured at the commencement of the war. As soon as it was dusk, Stanley went with Meinik into the town. It was a place of considerable size, with buildings at least equal to those at Prome. Toungoo had formed part of the kingdom of Pegu, before it was subdued by the Burmese. The peculiar and characteristic facial outline of the latter was here much less strongly marked, and in many cases entirely absent. So Stanley felt that, even in daylight, he could pass without attracting any attention. The prison was surrounded by a strong and high bamboo fence, and in the space enclosed by this were 8 or 10 dwellings of the usual wooden construction. A dozen armed men were seated by a fire in the yard, and 2 sentries were carelessly leaning against the gate. There should be no difficulty in getting in there with 2 rope ladders, one to climb up with and one to drop on the other side, Stanley said. You may be sure that most of the guard go to sleep at night. The first thing to ascertain is which house the prisoners are kept in, and in the second place, how my cousin is going on. We can do nothing until he is able to walk for a short distance. Let's move round to the other side of the enclosure. It may be that a sentry is posted at their door." On getting to the other side, and looking through the crevices between the bamboos, they could make out 2 figures squatting by the door of one of the houses, and had no doubt that this was the one in which Harry Brooke was confined. "Now, Meinik, the first thing is for you to go and buy a rope. When the place gets quite quiet, we will make a loop and throw it over the top of the palisade behind that hut. Then I will climb up and let myself down inside, and then crawl up to the hut and see what is going on there. If my cousin is alone, I will endeavour to speak to him; but of course there may be a guard inside as well as at the door. If he is very ill, there will probably be a light." "Let me go, master." "No, Meinik, I would rather go myself. I shall be able to judge how he is, if I can catch a sight of him." Chapter 13. Preparing a Rescue. Stanley remained where he was until Meinik returned in half an hour with the rope. Stanley made a loop at one end, and then knotted it at distances of about a foot apart, to enable him to climb it more easily. Then they waited until the guard fire burnt down low, and most of the men went off into a hut a few yards distant, 3 only remaining talking before the fire. Then Stanley moved round to the other side of the palisade, and, choosing a spot immediately behind the hut where the sentries were posted, threw up the rope. It needed many attempts before the loop caught at the top of one of the bamboos. As soon as it did so, he climbed up. He found that the position was an exceedingly unpleasant one. The bamboos were all so cut that each of them terminated in 3 spikes, and so impossible was it to cross this that he had to slip down the rope again. On telling Meinik what was the matter, the latter at once took off his garment and folded it up into a roll 2 feet long. "If you lay that on the top, master, you will be able to cross." This time Stanley had little difficulty. On reaching the top, he laid the roll on the bamboo spikes, and was able to raise himself onto it and sit there, while he pulled up the rope and dropped it on the inside. Descending, he at once began to crawl toward the hut. As he had seen before climbing, a light was burning within, and the window was at the back of the house. This was but some 20 yards from the palisade, and when he reached it, he stood up and cautiously looked in. The Indian trooper was seated in a chair, asleep, without his tunic, One arm was bandaged, and a blood-stained cloth was wrapped round his head. On a bamboo pallet, with a dark rug thrown over it, was another figure. The lamp on the wall gave too feeble a light for Stanley to be able to make out whether the figure lying there was Harry, but he had no doubt that it was. In a low tone he said, in Hindustani, "Wake up, man." The soldier moved a little. Stanley repeated the words in a somewhat louder tone, and the trooper sprang to his feet and looked round in a bewildered way. "Come to the window," Stanley said. "It is I, your officer." The man's glance turned to the window, but surprised at seeing a Burmese peasant, as he supposed, instead of the officer, he stood hesitating. "Come on," Stanley said. "I am Lieutenant Brooke." The soldier recognized the voice, drew himself up, made the military salute, and then stepped to the window. "I have come," Stanley said, "to try and rescue Lieutenant Brooke and yourself. I have some friends without. How is he?" "He is very ill, sir. He is badly wounded, and is unconscious. Sometimes he lies for hours without moving. Sometimes he talks to himself, but as I cannot understand the language, I know not what he says. But sometimes he certainly calls upon you. He uses your name often. I do what I can for him, but it is very little. I bathe his forehead with water, and pour it between his lips. Of course he can eat nothing, but I keep the water my rice is boiled in, and when it is cool, give it to him to drink. There is some strength in it." "Then nothing can be done at present," Stanley said. "Tomorrow night I will bring some fruit. You can squeeze the juice of some limes into a little water, and give it to him. There is nothing better for fever. As soon as he is well enough for us to get him through the palisades, we will have a litter ready for him and carry him off, but nothing can be done until then. How are you treated?" "Oh, they give me plenty of rice, sahib, and I am at liberty to go out into the courtyard in the daytime, and now that I know you are near, I shall have no fear. I have been expecting that they would send me to Ava, where no doubt they would kill me, but I have thought most that if they were to send me away from here, and there was no one to look after the sahib, he would surely die." At this moment Stanley felt a hand roughly placed on his shoulder. Turning round, he struck out with all his strength, full in a man's face, and the man fell like a log. "If they ask who was here," he said hastily to the trooper, "say that you knew not who it was. A Burmese came and spoke to you, but of course you thought that he was one of the guard." Then he ran to the rope, climbed up, and as he got over, pulled it up and threw it down to Meinik, as he thought that there might be some difficulty in shaking it off from the bamboo. Then he dropped to the ground, bringing down the pad with him. "Did you kill him, master?" Meinik asked, as they hurried away. "I was watching the window, and saw you talking to someone inside. Then I saw a man suddenly come into the light and put his hand upon you, and saw you turn round, and he fell without a sound being heard." "There is no fear of his being killed, Meinik. I simply hit him hard, and he went down, I have no doubt, stunned. It's unfortunate, but though they may set extra guards for a time, I think they will not believe the man's story, or at any rate will suppose that it was only one of the guard who, not being able to sleep, wandered round there and looked into the hut from behind. The worst of it is that I am afraid there was no chance of my being able to take my cousin some limes and other fruit tomorrow night. As I said I would, he is very ill, and quite unconscious." "That is very bad, master. I will try and take him in some fruit tomorrow. If they won't let me in, I will watch outside the gates, and when one of the guard comes out, will take him aside, and I have no doubt that for a small bribe he will carry in the fruit and give it to the trooper. I wonder that they put them into that hut with the window at the back." "I don't suppose they would have done so, if my cousin had not been so ill that it was evident he could not, for some time, attempt an escape." They joined the villagers outside the town, and telling them that there was nothing to do that night, returned to the temple. They found the man and the two boys sitting by a great fire, but shivering with terror. "What is the matter?" Stanley asked. "The spirits have been making all sorts of noises outside, and there are other noises at the end of the cave, close to the horses." Stanley took a brand and went over to them. They were both munching their grain quietly. "Well, you see the horses are not frightened, so you may be sure that whatever were the noises you heard, there was nothing unnatural about them. What were they like?" The question was not answered, for at that moment a sound like a loud, deep sigh was heard overhead. The natives started back, and even Stanley felt for a moment uncomfortable. "It's only the wind," he said. "There must be some opening above there, and the wind makes a noise in it, just as it does in a chimney. We will see all about it in the morning. Now, as to the noises outside." "They were wailing cries," the man said. "Pooh! They must have been tigers or leopards, or perhaps only wild cats. No doubt they smelt you and the horses, but were too much afraid of the fire to come any nearer. Why, you must have heard tigers often enough to know their cries."
"I thought myself that they were tigers," the man said, rather shamefacedly; "but the boys said they were certain that they were not, and I was not sure, myself, one way or another." Sitting down by the fire, Stanley told the men the exact position of the prisoners, and said that he feared it would be altogether impossible to get Harry out, for the present. "I would give anything to have him here," he said, "but it would be impossible to get him over the palisade." "We might cut through it, master," Meinik said. "With a sharp saw we could cut a hole big enough, in an hour, to carry his litter out. The only thing is, we could not get his bed through that window." "We might get over that by making a narrow litter, and lifting him from the bed on to it. The difficulty would be what to do with him when we got him out. As to carrying him any distance, in his present state it would be out of the question. Besides, the guard are sure to be vigilant, for some considerable time. I think that the best plan would be for you all to go back to your village tomorrow, taking the horses with you, and for one of you to come over, every other day, for orders. Then there would be no occasion for anyone to watch the horses. They certainly will be of no use to us, at present, for it will be weeks before my cousin is strong enough to ride. Meinik and I will take up our abode close to the edge of the forest, for that will save us some 4 or 5 miles' walk each day. The first thing in the morning, you shall go with me and choose a spot, so that you may both know where to find us. 2 of you have got axes, and will make a shelter in a tree, so as to be able to sleep without fear of tigers when we go out there, though I dare say that we shall generally sleep near the town. However, one or another of us will always be at that spot, at midday, on the days when you are to meet us. Now that I think of it, 2 of you may as well stay at the shelter for the present, while the other 3 and the 2 boys go home. Then there will be no occasion to take the long journey so often. When we do get my cousin out, we shall have to take up our abode for a time, either here or in the forest, until he is well enough to bear the journey." In the morning, Stanley closely examined the roof of the cave, but could see no opening to account for the noise that he had heard. He had, however, no doubt that one existed somewhere. He left a man with the 2 boys in charge of the horses, and went with the others until they approached the edge of the forest. They kept along within the trees for half a mile, so that any fire they might light would be unseen by people travelling along the road. The men considered this precaution needless, as they declared that no one would venture to pass along it after nightfall, partly owing to the fear of tigers, and partly to the vicinity of the temple. A suitable tree was soon fixed on, and the Burmese, now in their element, ascended it by driving in pegs at distances of 2 feet apart. Once among the high branches, they lopped off all small boughs that would be in the way, and then, descending, cut a number of poles, and many lengths of tough creeper, and with these they constructed a platform among the higher branches, and on it erected a sort of arbour, amply sufficient to hold 4 or 5 people lying down. This arbour would hardly be noticed, even by persons searching, as it was to a great extent hidden by the foliage beneath it. Stanley told Meinik that they had better buy some rope for a ladder, and take out the pegs, as these might catch the eye of a passer-by, and cause him to take a closer search above. As soon as the work was finished, 2 of the men went back to the temple, to start at once for home with their companion, the boys, and the horses. Stanley had brought with him his pistols, the 2 horse blankets, and other things that might be useful, and when these were stored above, he, with Meinik and the 2 men, went toward the town. He stopped, as before, a short distance outside. Just as it was dusk, the men returned carrying the rope that Meinik had bought, and a store of food. With these they were sent to the shelter, and Stanley entered the town, where he met Meinik. "I have sent in the fruit," the latter said. "I had no difficulty about it. I told the first soldier who came out, after I had bought it, that I came from the village where the white officer had been captured by the bandits. He had been very kind to us all, and as we knew that he had been carried off badly wounded, I had come over to get some fruit for him. But I found that they would not let me in at the gate. I said I would give an ounce of silver to him, if he would hand the things to the prisoner for me. He said at once that he would do so. He had heard the whites always treated their wounded prisoners very well, and that there would be no difficulty about it, for that there was a window at the back of the hut where he was lying, and he could easily pass things in there without anyone noticing it. If the prisoner was, as I said, a good man, it was only right that he should be helped. I told him that I should look out for him, and might want him to do the same another day. I think that he was an honest fellow, and might have passed the fruit in, even without a reward. Still, everyone is glad to earn a little money. He told me that a strange thing had happened last night. One of his comrades had declared that he had found a giant standing at the window where the prisoner was. He put his hand upon him, when he was struck down by lightning. No one would have believed his tale at all, if it had not been that his nose was broken. The other prisoner had been questioned, but as he did not understand Burmese, they could learn nothing from him. 2 guards were, in future, to be placed at the back of the house, as well as in the front. "That part of the business is bad, Meinik. I dare say we shall be able to bribe them, master. You may be sure that most of them are eager to get back to their own villages, and for a few ounces of silver they would be glad enough to help us, and then to make their escape and go off to their homes. The man I saw today might find one among them ready to do so, with him, especially if their homes happened to be on the other side of the hills, and there would then be no chance of their being seized and sent back again by their head man. The sentry would only have to let us know what night he would arrange for them both to be on guard, together, behind the hut. Then we should be able to manage it well." "It would be a capital plan, that, Meinik, if it could be arranged." "Well, it is a great comfort to know that the fruit has got in safely. The limes, especially, will be a great help to my cousin. Next time you see the man, you must try and get him to find out how he is going on." For a fortnight Stanley remained in the forest. Meinik met the soldier every other day, and sent in fruit, and at the end of the 10 days he heard that the prisoner had recovered his senses. It was said that, as soon as he was well enough to move, he was to be sent to Ava. "Now you had better begin to sound the man as to his willingness to aid him to escape." "I have very little doubt about it, master, for I have already learned that his home is on the other side of the hills. He went down with Bandoola, and returned after his defeat with a number of others, travelling up the bank of the Pegu River. If they had not had their military chief with them, they would have started straight for home, but they were marched here, and have been kept on duty in the town ever since. He has heard how well off the people are on the other side of the hills, under English rule, so I feel sure that he will be glad to escape, if he sees a chance of getting off." "That is certainly good. In the first place, let him know that the other English officer, who was at the village with the one they captured, has said that he would be ready to pay well anyone who would aid in his escape. If he says that he would be willing to do so, if he also could get away, tell him that one man would be of no use, but that if he could get another to join him, so that they could both go on guard together behind the house, it could be managed. But say that, in the first place, I must myself speak to the white officer, and learn exactly how he is, and whether he can endure a journey as far as this tree or the temple, whichever we may decide upon as best. When I have seen him, I will send for the other men from the village. I am in no hurry to get him away, for the longer he stays quiet the better, but at any moment the governor may decide that he is sufficiently recovered to be carried, and may send him off to Ava under a strong escort. Therefore, although we will put off moving him as long as possible, we must not run the risk of his being sent away." 4 days later, Meinik said that the man had arranged with another to join him, and that both would be on duty behind the hut, that evening, between 9 and midnight. Accordingly, at 10 o'clock, Stanley arrived, with Meinik and the 2 villagers, at the palisade. Meinik had insisted upon accompanying him to the hut. "I believe that the man is to be trusted, master. Indeed, I am sure he is, but I do not know the second man. He may have pretended to accept the offer, only on purpose to betray his comrade, and to obtain honour and reward for preventing the escape of the white man. Therefore, I must be with you in case you are attacked. Our other 2 men may be useful to give the alarm, if a party is sent round to cut us off." Stanley, who had brought a horse blanket with him to lay on the top of the palisade, was the first to drop into the enclosure. Meinik followed him closely. Nothing had been said to the guard as to the white officer of whom Meinik had spoken, being himself of the party, and Stanley had purposely left his pistols behind him, lest he should be tempted to use them. In case he was attacked, he carried a spear and a long Burmese knife. Meinik had begged to be allowed to go forward first, while Stanley remained by the rope. He pointed out that some change might possibly have been made, and that other men might have been placed on sentry. "I know you, master," he said. "If you got there and found 2 strangers, and they attacked you, you would fight. Then they would give the alarm, and others would come up before you could cross the palisade. I shall steal up. When I am close, I shall make a noise like the hiss of a snake. If my men are both there, they will repeat the sound. If they are not, and one comes forward to look for and kill the snake, I shall slay him before he has time to utter a sound. If the other runs forward at the sound of his fall, I shall kill him also. If no alarm is given, you can come forward and speak to your cousin. If there is an alarm, you must climb the rope. They will not know which way I have run, and I shall have plenty of time to get over the palisade and pull up the rope. Then they will think that the guards have been killed by some of their comrades." "I hope no such misfortune shall happen," Stanley said gravely, "for there would then be no chance whatever of our getting him away. He would probably be moved to some other place, and our one hope would be that we might rescue him on the road. which would be a difficult matter, indeed, if he were sent, as he certainly would be, under a strong escort. However, your plan is no doubt the best, for if I were killed or captured, that would be an end of any chance of his being rescued." Meinik crawled forward, and in a few moments Stanley heard a low hissing sound, followed by two others. He walked forward a step or two to meet Meinik as he came back. "It is all right, master. You can go on fearlessly." Meinik returned with him to the window, and posted himself outside, standing in the shadow, while Stanley stepped in through the open casement, which, indeed, was provided only with a shutter outside. This would ordinarily have been closed, but owing to the illness of the prisoner, and the strong desire of the governor that he should live to be sent to Ava, it had been opened to allow a fresh passage of air. The trooper sprung from his couch, as Stanley made a slight sound before attempting to enter, but Stanley said, in Hindustani, "Silence! It is I, Mr. Brooke." The trooper stared doubtfully at the dark, tattooed, half-naked figure. "It is I, Runkoor, but I am disguised. I was like this when I spoke to you through the window a fortnight since, but you could not then see my figure." "Are you awake, Harry?" he asked in English, as he approached the pallet. "Yes, I am awake. At least I think so. Is it really you, Stanley?" "It is I, sure enough, man," Stanley replied, as he pressed the thin hands of the invalid. "Did not Runkoor tell you that I had been here before?" But Harry had broken down altogether. The surprise and delight was too much for him in his weak state. "Of course," Stanley went on quietly, "I knew that he could not speak English, but I thought that he might make signs. He did make a sign. Each time they gave me fruit, he said, 'Sahib Brooke,' pointed outside and waved his hands about, but I could not make head or tail of what he meant. Why he should keep on repeating my name each time he gave me the fruit was a complete puzzle to me. As to the signs that he made, it seemed to me that he had gone off his head. I had been too weak to think it over, so I gave up worrying about it, and it never once struck me that it was you who sent me the fruit. What an awful figure you are!" "Never mind about that, Harry. I have come in to see how strong you are. I have bribed the 2 guards stationed outside." "I can just sit up in bed to take my food, Stanley. That is all. I could not walk a step to save my life." "I did not expect you to walk. What I want to know is whether you are strong enough to be carried a few miles on a litter. I have 5 men from the village where you were, and they can cut through the palisading behind the hut. I want to give you as long a time as possible, but I am afraid that, any day, the governor may have you taken out and sent in a litter to Ava, under a strong escort." "I could bear being carried out, no doubt, but if I could not, I should think it would do me no harm, so long as my wounds do not break out afresh. I suppose the worst that could happen to me would be that I should faint before I got to the end of the journey. But are you sure, old man, that this is not a dream?" "Quite certain. If you were well enough, I would give you a sharp pinch. If you are willing to venture, I will make my preparations at once. I have to send to the village, but in 3 days I shall be ready, and the first night after that the men manage to be on guard together behind, we shall be here. It may be a week, it may be more, but at any rate, don't worry about it. If they take you away suddenly, I shall try to get you out of their hands somehow." "My dear Stanley," Harry said, with a feeble laugh, "do you know that you are spoiling your chance of an earldom? You may take it that if you don't succeed to the title, old fellow, I shan't, for if you go under, I shall too. Now, goodbye. It would be fatal were I to be caught here. Try to get yourself as strong as you can, but don't let them notice that you are doing so." Without giving Harry a time to reply, Stanley pressed his hand and left his bedside. He paused for a minute to inform the trooper of the plans for the escape, and then he got through the window. Meinik joined him at once, and without a word being spoken, they crossed the palisade, threw down the rope and blankets, and dropped over them to the ground. On their way back to their tree, Stanley told the 2 men that the officer was better, and that the next morning at daybreak one of them must start for the village to fetch their 3 comrades. The boys were also to come back with him, as they were big fellows and carried spears, and might, as Stanley thought, be useful either in a fight or in assisting to carry Harry. On the following morning, after the man had started, Stanley went with Meinik to examine the temple more closely than he had done before. He thought that it would be a far better hiding place than their hut in the tree. There would certainly be a hot pursuit, and the next day they might be discovered, whether in the temple or in the tree, but in the latter they would be powerless to defend themselves, for the Burmese, with their axes, would be able to fell the tree in a few minutes, whereas in the temple a stout defence might be made for a time. Moreover, the rock chambers would be far cooler in the middle of the day than the hut. His chief object in visiting the temple was to find a chamber with a narrow entrance, that could be held by half a dozen men against a number of foes, and it was desirable, if possible, to find one so situated that they might, in case of necessity, retreat into another chamber or into the open air. Meinik was so confident in the white man's power to combat even evil spirits that he approached the temple with Stanley without betraying any nervousness. They had provided themselves with some torches of resinous wood, and Meinik carried a couple of brands from their fire. The chamber they had before been in was apparently the largest in the temple, but there were several other openings in the rock. "That is the entrance we will try first," Stanley said, pointing to one some 10 feet from the ground. "You see, there were once some steps leading up to it. No doubt, where we are standing, there was a temple built against the face of that rock, and probably that doorway led into one of the priests' chambers." It was necessary to pile 3 or 4 blocks of stone on the top of the 2 steps that alone remained intact, in order to enable them to reach the entrance. "Let me light the torches before you go in," Meinik said. "There may be snakes." "Oh, that's hardly likely, Meinik. You see, the face of the rock has been chiselled flat, and I don't think any snake could climb up that entrance." "Perhaps not, master, but it is best to be ready for them." They lighted 2 torches and passed through the doorway. There was an angry hiss some distance away. "That is a snake, sure enough, Meinik. I wonder how it got here." Holding their torches above their heads, they saw that the chamber was some 14 feet wide and 20 feet long. In the corner to the left something was lying, and above it a dark object was moving backwards and forwards. "It's a big boa," Meinik said. "Now, master, do you take the 2 torches in one hand, and have your knife ready in the other. If it coils round you, cut through it at once. This is a good place for fighting it, for there is nothing here for it to get its tail around, and a bow cannot squeeze very hard unless he does that." Stanley, feeling that in a combat of this sort the Burman would be perfectly at home, while he himself knew nothing about it, did as he was told, determining to rush in should it attack his follower. "You can advance straight towards him, master. I will steal round. He will be watching you, and I may get a cut at him before he notices me." Stanley moved slowly forward. As he did so, the great snake moved its head higher and higher, hissing angrily with its eyes fixed on the torches. Stanley did not take his gaze from it, but advanced, grasping his knife. He knew that the boa's bite was harmless, and that it was only its embrace that was to be feared. He was within some 8 feet of the reptile when there was a spring. The snake's head disappeared, and in a moment it was writhing, twisting, and lashing its tail so quickly that his eyes could hardly follow its contortions. "Stand back, master," Meinik shouted. "If its tail strikes you, it might do you an injury. It is harmless otherwise. I have cut its head off." Stanley stepped back a pace or 2, and stood gazing in awe at the tremendous writhing of the headless snake. "It's a monster, Meinik," he said. "It is a big snake, master. Indeed, I should say that it must be about 40 feet long, and it is as thick as my body. It would be more than a match for a tiger." "Well, I hope there are not many more of them about, Meinik." "Well, that depends, master. It may have its mate, but it is more likely that there will be no other. It would eat any smaller ones of its own kind, of course, but there may be some small poisonous ones about." As the writhing of the snake ceased, Stanley looked round and saw a narrow doorway in the corner opposite to that in which it had been lying. "Here's a passage, Meinik. Let us see where it goes to." Meinik had by this time lighted 2 more torches. "The more light the better," he said, "when you are looking for snakes," and holding them in one hand and his knife in the other, he passed through the doorway, which was about 4 feet high. Stanley followed him. The apartment was similar to the last, but narrower, and was lighted by an opening not more than a foot square. "See, Meinik, there is a staircase in the corner facing us." The steps were very narrow, but in perfect preservation. Without staying to examine the room, Meinik led the way up, examining every step carefully, and holding the knife in readiness to strike. They mounted some 40 steps, and then entered a room about 10 feet square. Except a window, some 18 inches by 3 feet, there was no apparent exit from the chamber. "Oh, I should think that there must be some way out of this place, Meinik. Why should they have taken the trouble to cut that long flight of steps through the rock, just to reach this miserable little chamber?" Meinik shook his head. The ways of these ancient builders were beyond him. "There must be an outlet somewhere, if we could but find it. Besides, we have not found where the snake came in, yet." "He could have come in at the door. A small snake could not have climbed up, but that big fellow could rear his head up and come in, quite easily. We have found no little snakes at all." Well, that may be so, but I still think there must be some way out of here. Why should men go to the labour of cutting this long stair, and excavating this chamber here, without any reason whatever? Let's look through the window, Meinik." It was a passage rather than a window, for the rock face had been left 4 feet in thickness. Crawling out, Stanley saw that he was 50 feet above the foot of the cliff. A yard below him was a ledge of rock, some 2 feet wide. It was level, and had deep grooves cut at regular intervals across it. He had no doubt that the roof of the outside temple had started from this point, and that the grooves were made for the ends of massive rafters of teak or stone. At that time, the passage to the chamber that he had left was doubtless used for an exit onto the flat roof. Stepping onto the ledge, he called Meinik to him. "Now, Meinik," he said, "we will follow this ledge. There may be some way up from it." Walking with a good deal of care, Stanley made his way along to a point where the ledge stopped, abruptly. Looking down, he saw the remains of a wall of solid masonry, and perceived that he had been correct in his surmise as to the purpose of the ledge. Then they turned and went back to the other end of the ledge. A few feet before they reached this, Meinik, who was now leading the way, stopped. "Here is a passage, master." The entrance was about the same size as that through which they had stepped out onto the ledge, but instead of going straight in, it started upwards. "Another flight of steps, Meinik. I am beginning to hope that we shall find some way out at the top. If we can do so, it will make us safe. We could defend those stairs and the entrance for a long time, and when we wanted to get away we could make quietly off without anyone knowing that we had left." Chapter 14. In the Temple. They went up the flight of steps for a considerable distance. Then they found the passage blocked by a number of great stones. Stanley uttered an exclamation of disgust. "It's fallen in," he said. "No doubt we are near the top of the rock. Either the staircase was roofed in, or there was a building erected over the entrance, and either the roof or the building, whichever it was, has fallen in. This is very unlucky. When we go down, we will climb up the hill and see if we can discover anything about it. With plenty of food and water," he went on, as they descended into the lowest chamber, "one could hold this place for any time." "Yes, master, one could store away the food, but where should we store the water? We might bring skins in that would last us for a week, perhaps 2 weeks, but after that?" "After that we should make our way off somehow, Meinik," Stanley said, confidently. "Well, there is no doubt that this is the place to shelter in. They are less likely to find us here than anywhere, and if they do find us, we can defend ourselves stoutly. I should say, too, that if we think it over, we ought to be able to hit upon some plan for making noises that would frighten them. You know how scared the man and the 2 boys were at the sighing sound in the other chamber. We certainly could make more alarming noises than that." Meinik nodded. "That we could, master. With some reeds of different sizes I could make noises, some as deep as the roar of a tiger, and others like the singing of a bird." "Then we will certainly bring some reeds in here with us, Meinik. I don't suppose they will mind, in the daytime, what sounds they hear, but at night I don't think even their officers would care to move about here, if we can but make a few noises they do not understand. Well, for the present we have done our work here, and you had best go off with the Burman to buy food, to serve in case of a siege. You had better go to some of the cultivators' houses near the edge of the wood for rice and fruit. If you can get the food there, you will be able to make 2 or 3 journeys a day, instead of 1. But before we start back, we will climb round to the top of the hill, and see what has happened to shut up the staircase." It took them a quarter of an hour's climbing, through the forest and the undergrowth, before they reached the upper edge of the rock wall in which the chambers had been excavated. It had evidently, in the first place, been a natural cliff, for when on the ledge Stanley had noticed that while below the point of the rock was as smooth as a built wall, above it was rough, and evidently untouched by the hand of man. Following the edge of the cliff, until standing as nearly as they could guess above the entrance to the steps, they walked back among the trees. At a distance of some 30 yards, they came upon a ruin. It was built of massive stones, like those which strewed the ground where the temple had stood. A great tree rose on one side, and it was evident that its growth had, in the first place, overthrown the wall at this point. Climbers and shrubs had thrust their roots in between the blocks that had been but slightly moved by the growth of the tree, and had in time forced them asunder, and so gradually the whole building had collapsed. "This tree must be a very old one," Stanley said, looking up at it, "for it is evident that this wall was thrown down a great many years ago." "Very old, master. It is one of our hardest woods, and such trees live, as they say, 500 or 600 years. There are some which are known to be even older than that." "Well, it is clear that the staircase came up here, but we have no means of knowing how far the point we reached is below this. I should say that the stones we saw are the remains of the pavement and roof, for you to see these great blocks that form the walls don't go as far as the middle, where there is a great depression. Still, of course, the steps may have come up on one side or the other, and not just in the middle of this little temple, for no doubt it was a temple. Now, you see, the reason for the steps up to that little square room are explained. Probably those 3 chambers were the apartments of the principal priests, and from them they could either go out onto the roof of the temple, or could, by taking the upper staircase to this point, leave or enter without observation. Well, now let us be off." On arriving at their tree shelter, they found that the Burman had got a meal ready, and after partaking of this, Meinik with the man started to buy provisions. It was fortunate that Stanley had, before starting from Prome, drawn some £20 worth of silver from the paymaster. He had expected to be away for 3 or 4 weeks, and during that time would have had to buy provisions for himself, Harry, and the 4 troopers, and might possibly have occasion for money for other matters. He had not paid the men from the village, for he knew that one of these would willingly accompany him to Prome to receive payment for them all. A very small amount of silver sufficed for the purchase of a considerable quantity of food in Burma. Fruit, of which many kinds grew wild in the woods, was extremely cheap, as was rice and grain. Therefore, as yet, with the exception of the small sum expended in Toungoo, his money was virtually untouched. The 2 Burmans made 3 journeys before nightfall, and returned each time with large baskets of fruit, grain, and rice. On the following morning they went into the town and bought 6 of the largest sized water skins, such as are carried for the use of the troops in India, 1 on each side of a bullock. As soon as they returned with these, they started for the temple. At a stream about 100 yards from the entrance, they partially filled one of the skins, and placing a strong bamboo through the straps sewn in it for this purpose, Meinik and the Burmans carried it to the temple, and with Stanley's assistance lifted it into the lower chamber. The others were, one by one, placed beside them. Then water was carried in the smaller skins and poured in, until they were all as full as they could hold. "There is water enough to last us for a month, if needs be," Stanley said, as, after securely tying up the mouths, they laid the skins down side by side. The smaller mussocks were then filled and placed with the large skins, and then, having done a long day's work, they returned to their tree just as the sun was setting. The 4 men and 2 boys were already there, they having done the 60 miles from the village without a halt. They had already cooked some rice and some slices of venison, which Meinik had brought with the water skins from the town that morning, and were now lying smoking their cigars with placid contentment. For the next 6 days Meinik went to the town every afternoon. On his return on the last evening, he said that the guard had told him that the governor had paid a visit to the prison that day, and had seen the white captive, and had decided that he was now well enough to travel, and that in 2 days' time he was to start for Ava, the court having sent down an urgent order that he should be carried there as soon as he was well enough to bear the fatigue. "Then tomorrow we must get him out," Stanley said. "Will our 2 men be on duty?" "Yes, master. They have not been on since the last night we were there. They will form the second watch, and will go on guard at midnight. I have brought 2 sharp saws, and have cut 2 strong bamboos for the litter." This was constructed the next day. It was very simple, being formed by sewing a blanket strongly to the 2 bamboos. 2 slighter bamboos, each 4 feet long, were tied loosely to the main poles. These were to be lashed across as soon as they had got beyond the palisade, so as to keep the poles 3 feet apart, which, as the blanket was 4 feet from pole to pole, would allow it to bag comfortably. The cross pieces could not be attached until they were beyond the palisade, for the window was but 2 feet wide, and it was therefore proposed to make the gap through the palisade the same width only. Late in the evening they entered the town, and sat down in a deserted corner until the time came for them to begin their work. At last Meinik said that by the stars it was already past midnight, and they then proceeded to the spot where they had before climbed the palisade. Here they at once set to work. The saws were well oiled, and in a very few minutes 5 bamboos were cut at the level of the ground, and 6 feet above it. As the stockade was bound together by cross pieces behind, the other portions of the bamboos remained in their places. Meinik and Stanley went first, followed by 3 of the Burmans, one of whom carried the litter. The other 2 Burmans, with the boys, remained on guard at the opening. All were barefooted, except that Stanley wore a pair of the lightest leather sandals. They went noiselessly up to the window, the guard, as before, responding to Meinik's hiss. Without a word, one after another entered the chamber. The trooper had been sitting at the table, evidently anxiously expecting their arrival. Stanley went up to the bed. "Are you better, Harry?" he asked, in a whisper. "Better, but still weak." Everything had been arranged beforehand. The litter was laid down on the ground, with the poles as far apart as possible. Then Stanley made a sign to the trooper to take one end of the rug on which Harry was lying, while he took the other. The Burmans ranged themselves on each side, and the blanket was lifted up, with the occupant and the pillow, composed of his clothes, and laid quietly onto the blanket of the litter. Then 2 Burmans went outside, while the other 4 men lifted the poles and carried one end to the window. The Burmans outside held the ends well above their heads, Stanley and the trooper raising their hands similarly. The other Burmans then crawled under it, out of the window. As the litter was moved forward through the window, they took their places of Stanley and the trooper at the poles, and silently moved on toward the palisade. Stanley and Meinik followed, joined by the 2 Burmese guards. Not the slightest sound was made as the 8 men crossed the short distance to the palisade, and passed through the opening, where the others, spear in hand, were awaiting them, ready to rush in and take part in the fray should an alarm be given. Stanley breathed a great sigh of relief as they passed out. A few paces further they halted, and the cross pieces were lashed to the poles. "Thank God you are out, Harry," Stanley said, as soon as they did this. "Has it hurt you too much?" "Nothing to speak of," Harry replied. "You managed it marvellously. Am I really outside the place altogether?" "Yes, fairly out. You will be more comfortable when we have lashed these cross pieces. You will not be lying then at the bottom of a bag, as you are now." When the work was completed, they proceeded at a rapid pace, for Harry's weight, reduced by fever as he had been, was a trifle to his bearers. The others followed close behind, and in a quarter of an hour they were well beyond the town. Stanley spoke to Harry once or twice, but received no answer, so he had no doubt that his cousin had dozed quietly off to sleep. The gentle motion of the litter would be likely to have that effect, especially as Harry had probably been lying awake for the last night or two, listening for the friends who might arrive at any time. When they reached the confines of the forest, the torches, which had been carried by the boys, were all lit, and each carried 2, with the exception of the bearers, who had but one each, while all kept close together round the litter. They waved their torches as they went, and although they heard the cries of several tigers in the forest, they had no fear of being attacked, so as many waving lights would deter the most hungry beast from venturing near. Once in the chamber at the temple, the litter was laid down on a pile of reeds and leaves that had been gathered the day before, together with a great store of brushwood and logs. Harry still sleeping quietly. In a short time a bright fire was blazing, and with this and the light of the torches, the chamber assumed quite a cheerful appearance. On the way Stanley had spoken to the 2 guards, thanked them for their service, and assured them that they would receive the reward promised by Meinik. "I am the British officer," he said, "who was at the village with my friend, though I was absent when he was carried off. As you see, I am disguised." Both had shown signs of uneasiness when they approached the temple, but Meinik had assured them that the spirits would not venture to approach a party having a white man with them, and that a night had already been passed in the temple without any harm coming of it. A meal, consisting of slices of venison, was at once prepared, and when this was eaten, and the whole party had lighted cigars, their spirits rose at the success of the enterprise. The soldiers, however, had been disappointed at hearing that there was going to be a stay for some little time there, to enable the wounded man to gain strength. "We may not stop long," Stanley said, "but you see, with the litter we could not travel fast, and you may be sure by this time the alarm has been given, for when they came to relieve you at the end of 3 hours, it would be found that you were missing, and then they would at once discover that the captives had gone too. By daybreak the whole garrison will be out. How many are there of them?" "There are 3,000 men in the town," the guard said. "After a party of your soldiers came within a short distance of it 2 months ago, 1,500 men were added to the garrison." "Well, you see, with 3,000 men they could scour all the woods, and if they overtook us we should be unable to make any defence. Here we may hope that they will not discover us, but if they do, we can make a desperate resistance, for as only one man can enter that door at a time, it would be next to impossible for them to force their way in. You have your guns, and I have a brace of pistols, and as all the others have spears, it will be as much as the 3,000 men could do to get in through that door. If they did, there is a still narrower door in the corner to defend, and beyond that there is a long, narrow, steep flight of stairs that one man could hold against a host. The first thing in the morning we will carry our stores to the upper chamber. We have water and rice enough to last us for a month, if we are capable, so that although I hope they won't find us, I shall not be at all afraid of our beating them off if they do so." As soon as it was daylight, the stones that had been added to the steps at the doorway were flung down, and then by their united efforts the 2 remaining steps were removed. Then they helped each other up, the last man being aided by 2 of his comrades from above. "There," Stanley said, "if they do come to search for us, they are not likely to suspect that we have got a badly wounded man up there. They may search the big chamber that we were in before, and any others there that may be on the same level, but this narrow entrance, 10 feet above them, is scarcely likely to attract their attention. If it does, as I said, we must fight it out, but it will be a wonderfully hard nut for them to crack." He then ordered the men to carry all the stores to the upper chamber. Just as they began the work, there was a slight movement on the bed. Stanley at once went up to it. Harry was looking around in a bewildered way. "Well, Harry, how are you feeling? You have had a capital sleep." "Oh, is it you, Stanley? I was not quite sure but that I was dreaming. Where am I? I must have gone off to sleep directly we started, for I don't remember anything after you spoke to me when they were making the hammock more comfortable." "You are in a temple, some 5,000 or 6,000 years old, I should say, and this is a rock chamber. The temple itself is in ruins. We are 10 miles from Toungoo, and shall wait here till the pursuit for you has slackened. In another week you will be more fit to move than you are at present. I should not like to carry you far, as you are now. Besides, if we had pushed on, they would have been sure to overtake us, for these fellows can run like hares." "But why should they not find us here, Stanley?" "Well, of course they may do so, but the entrance to this chamber is 10 feet above the ground, and another thing is, they have all sorts of superstitions about the place. Nothing would induce them to approach it after nightfall, and even in the daytime they don't like coming near it. Lastly, if they do find us, it will take them all their time to force their way in. I have 5 men and 2 young fellows quite capable of fighting. Then there are your 2 guards, Meinik, the trooper, and myself. So you see we muster 12. We have 2 guns and a brace of pistols and spears for us all, and if we cannot defend that narrow passage against any number of Burmans, we shall deserve our fate. Besides, there is another and even narrower door in the corner behind you. They would have to force that, and in the chamber beyond there is a narrow straight staircase some 40 feet high, which a man with an axe ought to be able to hold against an army. They are taking the stores up there now. We have got provisions and water for a month. When everything is straight, there we shall carry you up, and unless they sit down in front of this place and regularly starve us out, we are as safe as if we were in Prome. I wish to goodness you had that hideous dye off you, Stanley. I know it's you by your voice, but what with the colour and all that tattooing, and your extraordinary hair, I don't know you in the least." "I'm in just the same disguise as that in which I made my way down from Ava," Stanley laughed. "I felt very uncomfortable at first, with nothing on but this short petticoat thing, but I've gotten accustomed to it now, and I'm bound to say that it is cool and comfortable. Now, tell me about your wounds." "Oh, they're not very serious, Stanley. I had a lick across the head with a sword, that was the one that brought me down, and a slice taken out of my arm from the elbow nearly up to the shoulder. Also a spear wound in the side, but that was a trifle, as it glanced off the ribs. If I had been left as I fell, and somebody had bound up my wounds at once, I should have been all right by this time. The fellows did bandage them up to some extent, but the movement of the litter set them off bleeding again, and I fancy that I lost pretty nearly all the blood in my body. I think that it was pure weakness rather than fever that kept me unconscious so long, for I gather from the pantomime of the trooper that I must have been nearly a fortnight unconscious." "Yes, you were certainly so when I came the first time, Harry, but I think perhaps on the whole it's lucky that you were. You would probably have had a great deal more fever, if you had not been so very weak, and if you had escaped that, and had gone on well, you might have been sent off to Ava before I could get all the arrangements made for your escape." "Tell me all about it," Harry said. "It seems to me wonderful how you managed it." Stanley told him the whole story. By the time that he had finished, the stores had all been taken upstairs, and the fire most carefully extinguished, as the smoke would at once have betrayed them. The cross pieces of the litter had been taken off, to allow Harry to be carried in through the door, and he was now lifted. 2 of the men took off their clothes and wrapped the materials of the bed into these, carrying them up at once. As soon as they had gone, Harry was slowly and carefully taken to the upper chamber, and laid down again on the bed. Stanley took his place beside him, and the rest of the party went down to the lower room, having received the strictest orders not to show themselves near the entrance, and not to smoke until well assured that their pursuers must have passed on ahead. The bamboos of the litter were converted into a rough ladder, and on this Meinik took his post at the little window in the second of the lower rooms. Owing to the immense thickness of the rock wall, he did not get an extensive view, but he could see the path by which anyone coming up through the forest would approach the temple. It was now about 7:30, and by this time the pursuers might be at hand. In 10 minutes, indeed, distant shouts could be heard, and Stanley at once went down and joined the men below. He placed himself in the line of the doorway. As the wall here was 4 feet thick, the room was in semi-darkness, and, standing well back, he was certain that his figure could not be perceived by anyone standing in the glare of sunshine outside. The sounds grew louder and louder, and in a minute or two an officer, followed by some 20 men, emerged from the trees. All paused when they saw the temple. The men would have drawn back at once, but the officer shouted to them to advance, although showing small inclination to do so himself. They were still standing irresolute, when a superior officer on horseback, followed by some 50 footmen, came up the path. He shouted orders for them to search the temple, and as the fear of him was even greater than their dread of the spirits, the whole of the men made their way over the fallen stones and up to the face of the rock. They first entered the chamber where the horses had been stabled. The officer who had first arrived went in with his men and, coming out, reported to his senior that there had been a fire made, and that some horses had also been there, but that 3 weeks or a month must have passed since then. "Are you sure of that?" "Quite certain, my lord. It is extraordinary that anyone should have dared to enter there, still less to stable horses when, as everyone knows, the temple is haunted by evil spirits." "I care nothing for spirits," the officer said. "It's men we are in search of. Go and look into any other chambers there may be." At this moment a deep, mournful sound was heard. Louder and louder it rose, and then gradually died away. The soldiers stood as if paralyzed. Even the high official, who had been obliged to leave his horse and make his way across the fallen blocks on foot, stopped back a pace, with an expression of awe. He soon recovered himself, and shouted angrily to the men to go on. But again the dirge-like noise rose, louder and louder. It swelled, and then as gradually died away, but this time with a quavering modulation. The men looked up and round. Some gazed at the upper part of the rock, some straight ahead, while others turned around and faced the forest. "Search!" the officer shouted furiously. "Evil spirits or no evil spirits, not a man shall stir from here until the place is searched." Then rose a shrill, vibrating sound, as if of eerie laughter. Not even the officer's authority or the fear of punishment could restrain the soldiers. With cries of alarm they rushed across the ruins and plunged into the forest, followed, at a rate which he tried in vain to make dignified, by the officer who, as soon as he reached his horse, leaped upon it and galloped away. The Burmese keenly appreciate a joke, and as soon as the troops had fled, the villagers and guards inside the temple threw themselves down on the ground and roared with laughter. Stanley at once made his way into the upper room. "Splendidly done, Meinik. It was like the note of an organ. Although I knew what you were going to do, I felt most startled myself when that deep note rose. No wonder they were frightened." "Well, at any rate, master, we are safe for the present." "For the present, no doubt, Meinik, but I question if we shan't hear of them again. That officer was a determined looking fellow, and though he was scared too, he stuck to it like a man." "That is the governor of the town, master. I saw him carried through the streets in his chair. Everyone was bending to the ground as he passed. He was a famous general at one time, and they say that he is likely to command a part of the army again, when fighting starts." "Well, I think we shall hear of them again, Meinik. I don't suppose that he really thought that we were here, for certainly no Burman would take up his abode in this place, even to save his life. They will push on the chase through the woods all day, and by that time they will feel sure that they would have overtaken us, had we gone straight on. Then I should not be at all surprised if he tries again." "Perhaps he will, master. Like enough he will chop off the heads of some of the men that ran away, and pick out some of his best troops for the search. Still, I hope he won't think of it." Stanley shook his head. "Well, I hope so too, Meinik. There is one thing about which I feel certain. If he does find us here, he will stay here, or at any rate leave some troops here until he gets us. he would know that he would get into serious trouble at Ava for letting the prisoners escape, and it would be all important for him to recapture them. "Now we are up here, Meinik, we will go and have a look at that upper staircase again. If we are besieged, that's our only hope of safety." They again went along the ledge and up the staircase. Stanley examined the stones that blocked the passage for some time, and at last exclaimed: "There, Meinik, look along by the edge of this stone. I can see a ray of light, yes, and some leaves. I don't think they are more than 30 feet above us." Meinik applied his eye to the crevice. "I see them, master. Yes, I don't think those leaves are more than that distance away." "That is what I came to look for," Stanley said. "It was evident that this rubbish could only be the stones of the route and pavement over the depression in the middle of the ruin, and what these could not block up the staircase very far. The question is, will it be possible to clear them away? Evidently it will be frightfully dangerous work. One might manage to get one stone out at a time in safety, but at any moment the loosening of one stone might bring a number of others down with a run, and anyone on this narrow staircase would be swept away like a straw." Meinik agreed as to the danger. "Well, we need not think it over now, Meinik, but if we are really besieged, it's by this way that we must escape, if at all. We must hope that we shan't be beset, but if we are, we must try here. I'd rather be killed at once by the fall of a stone on my head than tortured to death." Meinik nodded, and they descended the stairs, put out the torches that they had used there, and returned along the ledge to the chamber where Harry was lying. "So Meinik scared them away," Harry said, as Stanley sat down beside him. "I could not think what he was going to do when he came up here with that long reed, as thick as my leg. He showed it to me, and I saw that it had a sort of a mouthpiece fixed into it, and he made signs that he was going to blow down it. When he did, it was tremendous, and as it got louder and louder, I put my hands to my ears. Everything seemed to quiver. The other row, the diabolical laughing noise, he made with a smaller reed. It was frightful, but the big note was more like a trombone, only 20 times louder. Well, do you think we have done with him?" "I hope so, Harry. At any rate, you can be assured that they will never fight their way up here, and long before our provisions are finished, I have no doubt that I shall be able to hit on some plan of escape." The day passed quietly. The woods were as silent as usual. The Burmans were all in high spirits at the success of Meinik's horn. When it became dark, they hung a blanket over the entrance, placed one of the lads on watch just outside it, and then lighted a fire. Stanley took a couple of torches and went up to Harry, taking the precaution to hang a cloth before that window. "I have not said much about thanking you, old fellow," Harry said, "but you must know how I feel." "You had better say nothing about it, Harry. I have only done what you would have done, had you been in my place. Had you been in charge of that party, and I had been carried off, I know you would have done all in your power to rescue me. You might not have succeeded quite so well, because you do not know their language, but I know that you would have tried. After all, I have not run anything like so much risk as I did when I rescued Meinik from the leopard, and he, of course, was an absolute stranger to me. Besides, you are not rescued yet. We won't hold on until we are out of the wood." "It's very cool and pleasant here," Harry said, after lying without speaking for a few minutes. "It was dreadfully hot in that hut in the middle of the day, and I used to feel that I lost almost as much strength in the day as I picked up at night. I am wonderfully better this evening. Of course, that long sleep had something to do with it, and the pleasure of being free, and with you, had still more, but certainly the coolness and the air blowing through that opening have counted for something. Well, we shall feed you up as long as you are here, Harry, and I hope in a fortnight to see you pretty firmly on your legs again, and then, if there is nothing to prevent it, we will carry you off triumphantly." Meinik here came in with 2 bowls of broth, for they had bought a few earthenware utensils on one of the visits to Toungoo. "This is first rate," Harry said, as he finished his first one. "What's it made of?" "I never ask questions," Stanley replied, who tried successfully to keep down a smile. "Meinik is a capital cook, and turns out all sorts of nice little dishes. Here comes his step again. What have you there, Meinik?" he asked, as the Burman entered with 2 plates. "A slice of mutton done on sticks over the fire, master, and some rice with it." "Oh, that is first rate," Harry said heartily, when he had finished. "They did not give me meat in prison. I suppose they thought I was not strong enough for it." "Oh, they eat very little meat themselves, Harry. Now, I fancy your dinner is done, except some fruit. We have plenty of that." There were, however, some fried bananas, and Harry declared he had feasted like a king. "If this goes on, Stanley, I will wager that I shall be up and about in a week, and shall be offering to run a race with you in a fortnight." You will be a good deal longer than that before you are fit to walk any distance. Still, with a good appetite, which you are sure to have after your illness, plenty of food, and the cool air in these caves, I do expect that you will pick up fast." The next day passed quietly. "I shall be glad when tomorrow is over," Stanley said to Meinik, the last thing before going up to Harry's cell. "Today I expect they are all marching back again, and if they pay us another visit, it will be early tomorrow morning. Be sure that 2 men are on watch. They can relieve each other every hour, and I shall come down myself occasionally to see that all is right, but I don't think that even the governor could get his men to come near this place after dark." "We will keep good watch, master, for I have no fear of their coming."
Chapter 15: The Attack. Stanley got up several times during the night and went below to the watches, as he felt sure that they would be nervous, for though they had now to a large extent got over their superstitious fears, they would still be timid at night. They reported that everything was still round the temple, but that they had heard distant sounds in the woods, and on the first of these occasions he had, after returning to the room above, gone out onto the ledge, and from that height could see the reflection in the sky of a number of fires extending in a semicircle, at a distance of about a mile or so from the temple. From this he felt convinced that the governor was determined to have a thorough search made in the morning. As soon as it was daylight, the sound of the blowing of horns and the beating of drums was heard in the forest, and half an hour later a large body of men poured out from the trees, headed by the governor himself. "Now," he shouted, "this place is to be searched in every hole and corner. As to the evil spirits, there is no fear of them either by day or night. Did you ever hear of their attacking a large body of men? They may strangle a single traveller who ventures into their haunts, but no one ever heard of a Burmese army being attacked by them. Now every man has to do his duty, and the first who wavers, his head is to be struck off at once. Forward!" The troops rushed impetuously across the ruins, penetrated into the various chambers in the rock, and in a few minutes all these were reported to be empty. "There are chambers higher up," the governor said. "We will search them. And look at that door up there. It must lead to somewhere. Bring stones and make a stair up to it." It was evident now that there was no longer any hope of concealment, and Stanley stepped to the entrance. "My lord governor," he shouted, "there is a strong force here, and all your army could not gain an entrance. We do not wish to take the lives of brave men, but if we are attacked we must defend ourselves, and I pray you to withdraw with them, and not to throw away life." This address from an apparent peasant excited the wrath of the governor, who shouted, "Shoot him, men!" But before the order could be obeyed, Stanley had stepped back into the chamber, where he had already ordered the men to stand out of the line of the door. A number of muskets were fired, and several bullets struck the back wall of the chamber. The firing continued, and Stanley said, "Keep where you are, men, until they have finished. Then approach the door, for directly they begin the attack, the men behind must stop firing. There will be some minutes yet." He ran quickly up to Harry's room. "They are attacking us," Harry exclaimed. "Oh, how I wish I could come down and help." "They can never get in, Harry. British soldiers might do it, but not these fellows. They can only enter 2 abreast, and with a dozen spear points facing them, what can they do? I thought that I would just come up and tell you it was all right. It will take them 5 minutes at least to pile up stones level with the doorway." Stanley again joined those below. Meinik, the trooper, and one of the Burmese were to form the first line. The 4 other Burmese were to stand behind, with their spears between the men in front. The 2 guards with their muskets, and the boys were to act as a reserve. Stanley had armed himself with one of the axes, and was stand by the side of the entrance, so that if the spearmen were pressed back, and any of the assailants succeeded in passing the entrance, he would strike them down. Presently there was a silence outside. "Keep well back," Stanley said. "They have laid their stones, and we shall have a rush directly, but they will most likely pour in a volley first." The pause lasted for a minute or two. Then a drum was beaten, and 100 muskets were fired. A rain of bullets flew into the cave. "Now," Stanley shouted, "form up." A wild yell was raised by the Burmese. Now they knew that they were fighting human foes. Their courage returned, and there was a rush of men up the pile of stones to the entrance. But in vain they tried to force their way into the chamber. Those in front fell pierced by the spears, and while the defenders could see their figures against the light, the assailants, coming out from the sunshine, could see nothing in the chamber, which was now darkened by their filling up the entrance. Not once was it necessary for Stanley to strike.
The Burmans' spears did their work thoroughly, and in 2 or 3 minutes the entrance was nigh choked up with dead bodies, adding to the difficulty of the assailants. Pressed on by those behind, the foremost fell over these obstacles, and were instantly pierced by the spears, until it was no longer possible to get through the outer entrance, much less make their way into the chamber. Again and again the attack was repeated, and as often repulsed. Before advancing, the Burmese each time endeavoured to clear the passage by drawing out the bodies of their comrades, but the 2 guards now posted themselves in front, and shot man after man who made the attempt. At last the Burmese drew off, but not until some 50 or 60 had been killed. The governor was seen gesticulating furiously to a party of officers, and presently a final attack was made, led by several officers of rank. This was as unsuccessful as the others. The bodies, indeed, of the killed now formed a well-nigh impassable barrier, and after several of the officers and many of the bravest men had fallen, the remainder withdrew suddenly. The governor appeared to recognize that the task was an impossible one, and 200 or 300 men were at once set to work felling trees, and by nightfall a high stockade had been erected round the open ground in front of the temple. "Yeah, they are going to try to starve us out," Stanley said. "There is no more chance of fighting tonight." As soon as the stockade was finished, musketeers took their place behind it and opened a dropping fire at the entrance, while the woodcutters continued to fell trees. "We must get rid of these dead bodies if we can," Stanley said, "or the place will be uninhabitable in a day or two. Get those 2 bamboos we had for the litter, Meinik. We will push the bodies out, one by one, beginning with those on the top of the heap. We can keep down behind the shelter of the pile till we have got most of them out. After that we must take our chance of a shot." It took them some hours' work, but at last the passage was cleared, and the bodies all thrown outside. The fire was lighted in the next room, and Stanley, bidding 2 men listen attentively for any movement, went up again to Harry, to whom he had paid a flying visit as soon as the Burmese drew off. "We cannot risk having a light here, Harry," he said. "I don't want them to have any idea that this chamber, which is nearly 50 feet above the entrance, is in any way connected with the rooms below. If such an idea struck them, they might lower men down from above by ropes, and so take us in the rear. Did you say that we are regularly shut up in front by that stockade?" "Yes, there is certainly no getting out that way. Behind, you know, it is a sheer wall of rock, and the only possibility that I can see is that we may clear a staircase which runs up through the rock, from a ledge on the level of this room, to the ruins of a building above. At present the upper part is entirely choked up with blocks of stone and rubbish, and it will be a very awkward job to get through it. But so far, it seems to me, it's that or nothing." "What are they going on chopping down trees for?" "I believe their general is doing it to bring large numbers of his troops close up to the stockade, partly perhaps to keep up the spirits of the front line by their company, partly to render impossible any attempt on our part to make our way out by a sudden rush. Of course, they don't know what our strength is, but they have had so sharp a lesson today that they will take every precaution in future." "Well, what is it, Meinik?" "We have been talking together, master, and we think that, if we were to call out that they might take the bodies away without any interference by us, they would do so. Several officers of rank have fallen there, and it is our custom always to carry off the dead, when it is possible." "It would certainly be worth trying the experiment, anyhow, Meinik. But we must all stand to arms while they are doing it, as they might make a sudden rush. However, we would risk that, for those bodies have been worrying me very much, and I would give anything to have them taken away. I will go down with you." Meinik accordingly went down to the entrance and shouted out, "Peace, peace! I am ordered by the English officer to say that he would wish those who have fought so bravely to be honoured after death, and that no shot shall be fired and no interference made with those who come to carry away the dead." There was silence for 2 or 3 minutes, and then a voice called back, "It is well. For 2 hours there shall be peace between us." "I have no doubt the governor is as glad to do this as we are. It is considered a disgrace if the dead are not carried off the ground to burial, and if he sends despatches to Ava, he will be glad to be able to put in that the brave men who fell have all been buried with due honours. Besides, Meinik, it would not be encouraging to his troops for them to have that pile of dead bodies before them, and indeed would be enough to cause a pestilence in a few days." The men were formed up again round the entrance. The Burmese did their work silently. Occasionally a slight movement was heard, but no one could have imagined that 100 men were busy outside. A number of them carried torches, and all worked steadily and in good order under the direction of 2 or 3 officers. One of the posts of the stockade had been pulled up, and through this the bodies were carried. It was less than 2 hours before a horn sounded, and there was a loud call of, "The peace is over! All is done!" Beyond the stockade great fires blazed among the trees. The work of chopping down the forest continued, and by the morning the ground had been cleared for a distance of 30 or 40 yards from the paling. Then the Burmese raised another stockade 40 feet behind the first, so that if by carelessness or treachery the besieged should manage to pass through the first line, there would yet be another one in front of them. "I expect, master," Meinicke said as, standing well back, he watched the men at work, "the general is building this second line, not because he thinks that there is a chance of our getting through the first, but to keep the men at work, so as to prevent them from thinking anything about the spirits. Now that they have passed one night there, they will have got somewhat over their fear, and of course every day that passes without ill befalling them, they will think less and less about the evil ones." "Do you believe in them, Meinicke?" Meinicke hesitated. "Everyone knows, master, that evil spirits guard the treasures of the people that lived in the land long, long ago. No one can doubt that people who have rashly sought the treasures have been found dead, with staring eyes and swollen bodies. But as, at present, they must know well that neither we nor those outside are searching for treasure, they may not interfere." "Then you think that there are treasures buried here, somewhere?" "Oh, I cannot say, master. Everyone says so. The story has been handed down that this was once the greatest of the temples of the old people, and that when they were defeated by tribes from the east, I know not whether it was us or some people before us, the priests from all the other temples came here. The remains of their army came here, too, and fought outside the temple until all were killed. When the conquerors entered, they found the priests all lying in regular lines on the pavements. All were dead. One story is that they had stabbed themselves, another that they had taken poison. At any rate, no treasures were found, although it was known that the riches of the temple were great, and that all the other priests that had come here had brought the treasures from their temples with them. That was the beginning of the destruction of the place, for the pavement was torn up, and the walls in some places levelled, and the images of the gods broken up in search for the treasures. The work of the guardian spirits had already begun. They say that all who took part in the search died of a terrible pestilence that broke out. Since that time the place has been accursed. Once or twice kings have sent bodies of troops to search, and they say that some could never find the temple, but wandered about the forest for days, searching in vain for it. Others found so thick a darkness, like the blackest of smoke filling the forest, that even the bravest dared not enter. I say not that those things were so. I only say that these are the stories that have come down to us." "Well, Meinicke, we are not going to search for treasure, and it is evident that the spirits bear us no ill will. Indeed, I feel obliged to them, for it is likely enough that the soldiers will put down their misfortune to their influence, and that even the governor may feel that it would be useless to try to get them to renew the assault. This evening we will go up and have another look at the stairs, and see how we can best set to work to clear them. There is no great hurry about it, but the sooner we set to work the better." All day long a dropping fire was maintained on the entrance, but the troops behind the first stockade. But as, with the exception of 3 men kept always on watch, the defenders were stationed in the next chamber, the bullets pattered harmlessly against the wall. During the night the accumulated dust of ages had been swept up from the floor, and this had been strewn 3 inches deep in the passage between the outer air and the chamber, so as to cover the blood that had been shed there. As soon as it was quite dark, Stanley, Meinicke, and 3 of the villagers went out onto the ledge in front of the upper opening, made their way along it to the entrance of the stairs, and mounted. They carried with them 2 or 3 glowing brands from the fire, in one of the earthenware cooking pots, which was covered with a cloth to prevent the slightest glow being noticed by the enemy. The men, by Stanley's order, brought with them the bamboos of the litter, the saw they had used at the stockade, a hatchet, and some blocks of firewood. When they got to the point where the steps were choked up, they lighted the 2 torches, the men who brought up the rear of the party holding up a rug to prevent any reflection from the torches being seen outside. When Stanley and Meinicke had again examined the obstacle, the latter retired, and the Burmans, one by one, came up and looked at it. "Well, what do you think of it?" Stanley asked them. "It would be dangerous to touch it, my lord," one of them said. "If only one stone moved out from its place, it would be death to us all. They are firm now, quite firm, but if 2 or 3 were disturbed, the whole might come down at once." "Yes, I quite see that," Stanley said. Can any of you suggest a plan by which we could get out, without much risk of setting them in motion?" The Burmese were silent. "Well, I will tell you my scheme, then. I propose to cut the bamboos into lengths that will just reach across the passage. It is the lower stones that one is most afraid of. So long as these remain fixed, there is no fear of any general movement, but if they went, the whole mass might come down. This passage is less than 3 feet wide, and the bamboos are 12 feet long, so that each would make 4 the width of the passage. I propose to drive them tightly in, and fix them firmly with wedges. They must be put in so that they will actually touch the stones, so as to prevent their making the slightest downward movement. If they began to slide, no doubt they would carry away the bamboos, but if these were fixed firmly, by wedges, they ought to be sufficient to prevent any movement from taking place, especially as there would be enough of them almost to touch each other, extending from this lowest step on which the rocks rest some 5 feet upwards, that is, to within some 2 feet of the roof, which would be sufficient for us to crawl through, and the bamboos would serve as a ladder. Then I propose that we should work our way along the top, passing the small stones and rubbish backwards, after filling up all the cracks and crevices below us. I see, of course, that we should meet with many obstacles. Great stones may be sticking up, perhaps jammed against the roof. These would have to be broken off or chipped in pieces. No doubt the work will take time, but at any rate there is plenty of food for 3 weeks, and working by turns night and day, we ought to be able to burrow our way out. As we get on, we may not find the stones so tightly pressed together as they are here. At any rate, as we saw the light above us, only some 30 feet up, there ought not to be above 20 feet of closely packed stuff to get through. No doubt the work will be dangerous as well as hard, but as we know that if we do not succeed all our lives are forfeited, we can face the danger. Every one of us will take his share in turn. I shall do so, myself, and shall direct the work in general. What do you think of the plan?" "I think that it is possible, master," Meinik said. "At any rate, we must try it, since it is the only way that offers us any chance of life." The Burmese all agreed, and they at once set to work. The bamboos were first cut into lengths, and then, by means of the axe and wedges, were jammed so firmly from side to side that it would have required great force to dislodge them. These supports were somewhat irregularly placed, as it was necessary that they should absolutely touch the stones. As they proceeded with the work, the spaces behind the bamboos were filled tightly with rubble, so as to solidify the whole. When the last support was in place, Stanley said: "Now, Meinik, do you with these 3 work tonight. 4 others will take your place before dawn. Mind, at first I don't want you to attempt to move any fixed stones, but simply to clear away all small stones and rubble. You can stow a good deal behind the 2 upper bamboos. The rest you must put on the stairs. I will see, tonight, what we can manage in the way of tools for chipping away the big stones that cannot be moved. You had better relieve each other very often. The 3 who are not at work should sit down on the ledge outside, so that any stones accidentally dislodged will not fall on anyone. Every 10 minutes, one will come up to take the place of the man at work. Be sure that each, as he passes up or down, replaces the blanket carefully." They had indeed, before beginning to saw up the bamboos, fastened the blanket to one of the cross pieces of the stretcher, and cutting this to the width of the passage, had jammed it close up to the roof, so that the curtain, hanging down, effectually shut off the light. Stanley then descended the steps and rejoined Harry below. Before going down further, Stanley, who had during the day informed Harry of his plan, told him of the start that they had made. "Of course, it all depends upon what stones you meet with," Harry said. "If you come to a big solid block, I don't see how you are going to get through it." "Well, we have the hatches, and can whittle it away, and perhaps we can make some chisels from the ramrods of your guards' guns. A lot can be done, with patience and plenty of hands." Stanley then went down below, and explained to the others the plan proposed. The news gave them great satisfaction, for although Meinik had told them that there was a staircase above blocked with stones, it had seemed so impossible to him to clear it that he had placed no stress upon the fact, and the preparations made by the enemy to cut off any possible retreat had greatly depressed them. Stanley took one of the iron ramrods and, raking some of the embers from the fire, placed it in them about a foot from one end. Then he directed the others to fan the embers, until they raised them almost to white heat. Taking the ramrod out, he laid the edge of one of their knives upon it, and, striking its back with a stone, soon cut through the glowing rod. He repeated the operation, and had, then, 3 short rods of equal length. He now heated one end of each and, laying it on an axe on the ground, hammered it into chisel shape with the back of a light hatchet, repeating this several times until it had the required shape and sharpness. Then he plunged this into a pot of water. He did the same with the other two, and had now 3 chisels with which he hoped to be able to chip away the stones. The other ramrod he left intact, except that he sharpened one end. Then, going up to Harry's room, he lay down and slept for some hours, putting the 2 boys on watch and bidding the trooper look after them. The 2 Burmans, with one of the guards, were to go to work with him. Several times he woke. The last time, on looking out, he thought there was a faint light in the sky, and going down called up the 3 men, and bidding them bring up the 2 heavy axes, a light hatchet, and the 3 short chisels, he led them up the steps to the working party. "How have you got on, Meinik?" "Oh, we have cleared 4 feet, master, but there is a big stone sticking up now, and we can do nothing with it." "Well, we will have a try, and do you all go down at once. Take off your cloth, one of you, and fill it with this rubbish on the steps. Do it as quickly as you can. The day will be breaking in a few minutes." Stanley now climbed up and investigated the passage. The bottom was level, every crack and crevice between the stones being filled up with rubble. The obstacle Meinik had spoken of evidently formed a part of a flat slab. It reached within an inch of the roof, and at one side touched the rock wall. At the other there was an interval of some 4 or 5 inches, and the earth and rubbish had already been scraped out from behind it. Putting his hand in, he found that the block was some 4 inches in thickness. He thought that if he could get but a fair blow at it with the back of one of the heavy axes, he might break it off, but this was impossible. The total width of the passage did not exceed 3 feet, and as the men had, as they went, worked down somewhat, there was now about 30 inches between the bed of earth and rubbish on which he was lying and the roof. Taking the handle of the axe in both hands, he used the head as a battering ram, but without any success. He then called up the slightest of the 3 men and told him to crawl in beside him, and with their united strength they pounded the stone for some time. Finding that nothing could be done this way, Stanley sent the man back again, and then, taking one of the 3 chisels and a small hatchet, he proceeded to mark a line along the bottom of the stone, and then for 10 minutes worked away on it with the chisel and the hammer. Then he called up one of the others and showed him what he was to do. All day they worked by turns, and though progress was very slow, by nightfall the groove was half an inch deep. Stanley and the strongest Burman then went in together, and, lying on their backs again, tried the effect of the heavy axe, but still without success. Then Stanley told the man to get down and take out the wedge at the top of the axe, and to cut away the wood below the head, so that the latter would slip down 4 or 5 inches, and then to take off the head of the other heavy axe and put it on top, above it, and replace the wedge. In a few minutes the man rejoined him. "We must strike it as near the roof as we can," Stanley said. Both grasped the handle firmly. "We will sway it backwards and forwards 3 times, and then, the 3rd time, strike. 1, 2, 3, hooray!" As the 2-headed axe, driven with their united force, struck the stone, there was a sharp crack. "Yes, that has done it," Stanley said, turning over. There was a dark line along the groove, and the top of the stone inclined back 2 inches from the perpendicular, being kept in its place by the rubbish behind it. Stanley put his hand into the hole and got his fingers behind the stone, while the Burmese put the chisel into the crack and used it as a lever. In 2 or 3 minutes the stone was moved out of its position, taken out of the hole, and laid down on the steps. Half an hour later Meinik came up with a trooper, another guard, and one of the boys, and was delighted to find that the obstacle, which had seemed to him fatal to their hopes, had been removed. Stanley showed how they had carried out the work, and then with his party went down into the rock chambers. "It was pretty tiring work, Harry," he said, "though we were only at it about a quarter of an hour at a time. My wrists and arms and shoulders are aching as if I had been beaten with sticks. Tomorrow I will take up a good supply of firewood. The chisels got blunted before we had worked an hour, and we should get on a deal faster if we could sharpen them frequently." "Is the stone hard?" "No, it is a sort of marble, I think. We had the under part of the slab on our side, and I did not think of looking when we took it down. Anyway, it was not very hard, and with a good strong chisel and a short heavy hammer, I am sure we could have done it in an hour. Anyhow, it is a comfort that nothing came down on us. I examined the pile carefully, and there had not been the slightest movement among the lower stones, so that part of the difficulty seems to have been gotten over. Now I must go down and get something to eat, and then I'll go in for a good sleep. Are you feeling all right?" "Could not be doing better, Stanley. I've eaten 3 solid meals today, and have been sitting up on the edge of my bed for some time. I tried standing, but it was no go. Still, I do think that in a day or two I shall manage it." For 6 days the work continued. One party watched, another slept, and the third worked by turns. Some of the stones gave much greater trouble than the first they had met with, but having the fire close by proved a great assistance, as the chisels could be frequently sharpened. The men became more accustomed to the work, and the steady progress they made greatly excited their hopes. At the end of the week but one stone barred the way. This, however, was much the most formidable that they had encountered. It seems to have been a pillar, or a huge gatepost, and was square, measuring some 20 inches on each face. The obstacle was all the more formidable, as the upper end was inclined toward them, greatly increasing the difficulty in using the chisel. Beyond this, as far as they could see, there was merely a mass of smaller stones. The party who had been working upon this block were much disheartened when Stanley went up to relieve them. Owing to the inclination of the stone, their chisels could get but little bite, and though they had been working for 6 hours at it, they had scarcely made any impression. Indeed, at only one point had they so far broken the face that the chisel would cut. Meinik had come down 2 hours before to report to Stanley the nature of the obstacle, and when he went up he took with him the second ramrod, which had not hitherto been used. He saw at once that, as Meinik had told him, it would be impossible to get through this block by the same means as before, for as the groove deepened the labour would become greater and greater, and from the inclination of the stone they would in time arrive at a point where the axe could no longer be used to strike the chisel. The point at which the slight indentation had been made was nearly at the corner of the stone. This was gradually enlarged by hammering upon it with the head of the axe, and after an hour's work the surface had been so far pounded that the chisel could get a flat hold upon it. Then Stanley and one of the Burmans lay down and placed the cutting end of the long ramrod against it, and the others by turns struck the end with the back of a light hatchet, those holding the rod turning it slightly after each blow. Every half hour the edge of the chisel was resharpened, and by the time the next party relieved them, a hole of half an inch diameter and 2 inches deep had been drilled in the stone. Stanley remained with the newcomers for half an hour, instructing them in the work, and then went below. "Well, Stanley, what are you doing with this monstrous stone Meinik tells me about?" "Well, there's only one thing to do with it, Harry, and that is to blast it. The block is so inclined that one can do nothing with the chisels, and we are now drilling a hole. I don't know that I shall succeed, but at any rate I am going to have a try. If it fails, I must hit on some other way. The provisions are holding out all right, and Meinik calculates that with a little stinginess we could manage for another 3 weeks. We have drilled the hole in 2 inches today, and as we get more accustomed to the work I dare say we could do 3 inches in each shift. The block is 20 inches through on the straight, and maybe 2 feet on the line that we follow, so that in 4 days we shall be nearly through it. In 3 weeks we shall have made 5 holes, which will weaken it so that we may be able to break it off. However, I hope that we shall find 1 hole sufficient. I shall make it 15 inches deep, and then charge it with the contents of a dozen cartridges. I think that ought to do it." In 2 days and a half the hole was of the required depth. Harry had progressed so rapidly that he was able, that morning, to walk across his room. "We must try the shot at once," Stanley said, "because if it fails, we must go on working. If it succeeds, we can, if we like, wait for another week before we make off. By that time you will be strong enough to be got through that low passage, and walk for a little distance. Then we can cut some poles and rig up that hammock again. Do you know anything about mining? For I know nothing. I only had an idea how to drill the hole from seeing some engineers at work at Agra, years ago, but I am sure I don't know how they fired the shot or prepared it." "Well, I can tell you a little bit about it, Stanley, for I have been down a coal mine once or twice and watched the men doing it. First of all they put in the charge, then they put in a wooden rod, just the thickness of the fuse they use. Then they dropped in a little dry dust round it, which they pressed down very carefully with a small wooden rod. Then they dampened some dust and hammered that down sharp. After putting in about half an inch of this, they used dust slightly moistened, beating it down as before. When it was quite full they pulled out the centre stick and put the fuse into the hole that it left. "Well, we've not got any fuse," Stanley said, "but I think that if we take a narrow strip of cloth, moisten it, and rub gunpowder into it, let it dry, then roll it up, it would be all right. Then we could lay a train of damp powder to it, set the end alight, and bolt." "Yes, I should think that would do," Harry agreed. "But you would have to bolt very sharp, for if it went off before you got to the bottom of the steps, it might be very awkward." "I don't think the effect of the shock will be as great as that, Harry. It may crack the stone, but I should hardly think it would send anything flying out of the hole."